New World Patch 5.0.2 has some insane new tech coming to the game. We are getting a big change to server technology with the introduction of shards. It's pretty crazy, but it all makes sense. It's quite interesting that this is just a normal patch in a sense. It's actually the balance patch update, but in it, you know, the first thing they talk about is Rabbit's Revenge, which is interesting. You know, there's some new transmog, a new flail, an emote, the chest if you want it. Great, makes sense. But then we come to shards. We are basically getting server shard technology or layering in New World. My mind's a little bit blown. Like when I saw that, I was like, is this New World 2? Was Baggins right all along? Like what's going on here? Now I won't read it all to you, but what it is layering, and they're going to do it in 2 zones at the start. They're actually going to be doing it in Monarch's Bluff and Windswood. And you might know that that's because they are the starting beaches and settlements. So why would you do it there? Well, you would do it there if maybe you were getting fresh start servers, or maybe we were expecting quite a lot of people to play the game. Maybe if you were going to console, that makes sense to me. So if you don't know this technology, basically, let's say there's like 1,000 people and they're all on the beach of Monarch's Bluff. Well, the server can't handle 1,000 people. So what it will do is it'll split you into different layers or shards. And it might be that there's 200 people on each shard, and there might be 5 shards. So you'll only see the 200 people, you'll not see the 1,000, but the game will actually work. It won't be like laggy at all. It'll also help them reduce queues because they won't have to wait for you to leave the area. And the fact that they're doing it at the starting zones implies it's because of like fresh start servers and or console, if not both. And then there's various things that are going to be important for how they work. For example, if you're in a group, you'll get prioritized to be together as long as there's capacity. You'll actually be paired with your friends or your company members if you can. You can join other people's shards by going to the social menu and then just clicking, you know, join the shard. Area chat, of course, will only be limited to that shard. It's not like you'll be able to talk everywhere in the area, but global chat will work for everybody. And if you want to do stuff like trade, then obviously you've got to be on the same shard. All makes sense. There's a little bit of a question about resources, but I guess the resources in Windswood and Monarch's Bluff probably aren't that like valuable, and these shards will eventually get closed. So if the shard gets closed because there's not enough people, then you'll all move to the same shard, if that makes sense. PvP is a little bit interesting. There will be a dedicated single shard to PvP. Now, I wonder if that actually means you can be on the same shard as everybody else. Like if you're on a quiet server and there's nobody in Monarch's Bluff and you flag up as PvP, will you just be on a shard on your own with all the other PvPers, which might be nobody? Or will you be on the server where everybody is because there's not that many people there? It says that's to ensure fair play, but then I'm a little bit confused because it says players flagged for PvP in non-PvP shards can transfer to the PvP shard. I would have assumed that they just did transfer to the PvP shard. Not sure what's going on there. Now they say, by the way, for this whole thing that they're initially going to do Monarch's Bluff and Windswood, but if everybody's happy and they think it's a good idea and they'll take feedback, then they might expand it to other zones. Maybe if they were going to do a new zone, maybe it would make sense there as well. Camps, by the way, will be in the shard that they were placed in. However, if you've then since switched shards, you can recall to the location of your camp, even if your camp isn't there. At least that's the way that I read that one. If the shard gets shut down and you had a camp in it, then you lose the camp. All right, fair enough. Like, that's just so wild to me. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I don't personally like sharding or layering because I think it actually sort of slightly takes you out of the world. If you can be in one place and then suddenly transfer to another shard, which is basically the same place in the world, but then you see different people, I feel disconnected with that world. However, for a technology where it's like, well, everybody's starting, you're in the starting zones, and then they get sort of reduced later on, I'm sort of on board with that. I think that makes perfect sense. I think it's a great addition, especially if it works right. I think this is primarily for console, but it definitely will help for fresh start servers as well. So yeah, I can see both of those things happening. And they're probably going to get announced on June 7th, let's be honest. Pretty crazy that they just threw that in there. Like, I mean, it caught me completely by surprise. And not only that, it's coming literally tomorrow. It's coming tonight, tomorrow, depending where you are. It's tomorrow morning Pacific time, 12 noon my time. Perfect. Interesting. Wild. And then there are some just general patch updates that we would normally get, which are sort of like balance patch updates. So let's just talk about these. They're adding, or they're updating, I should say, the client-side anti-cheat just to the latest version. I don't think that's anything special, like it, just makes sense, probably a routine thing to sort of be doing. Then there's an issue with some storage sheds where you couldn't see them, you had to relog. Fixed a rare issue that's caused certain items to appear as if they were missing from the player's inventory. I don't know what that would be, and if I did, then maybe I wouldn't have seen it. Now, they don't necessarily mention the word desync in all of these, but one of the things that we need to talk about, obviously, is the combat. Season 5 changed the combat, and a lot of people didn't like it. There's a lot of changes here that I think will help. Whether or not it will help with desync, I don't actually know. They don't necessarily mention that. Obviously, tomorrow we'll find out. So this first one, they say that they fixed an issue that caused attacks not to buffer during certain animation frames of a dodge action, which might help with it feeling a little bit smooth. They have resolved issues to allow proper breakout from jumps to other actions. Don't really know what that one's about, but I know sometimes you can sort of like break things by jumping. Maybe they've fixed that. Maybe they've added it again. I don't know. This next one's pretty important. It's just one line, but it could actually be huge. Fixed an issue with sliding around while sprinting by adjusting acceleration for movement. Now they say fixed. Was that not intended? Was us running around in treacle sort of not the design? Maybe they just realized people didn't like it, so they're like, we fixed it, guys, it was broken. I sort of thought it was intentional because maybe it would help with range. Well, attacking the range, not if you are ranged. And I thought it was bad, but okay. They're changing it, they're fixing it, hopefully. We've seen this once before, but we're seeing it again. They fixed an issue where projectiles will sometimes not fire towards the crosshair location. That was mostly reduced, by the way. It was still happening prior to this patch, and I wouldn't honestly be surprised if it happens again, but it seemed to be something to do with elevation, not 100% sure. Hopefully it's finally fixed this time, because when your shots shoot off into the Netherland, it's pretty weird. Some of them, I don't really know what they mean. Fixed an issue that allowed upper body actions to continue during stuns. I mean, I'm lost. Maybe that was happening, maybe it wasn't. I didn't know it. I'm not going to read all of them, but I will provide a link if that's something you want to do. What they do say though is that they've improved animation blending when cancelling dodges, full body attacks and reactions with ranged attacks. Hopefully that'll just help the game feel a bit smoother, because they sort of made it a little bit clunkier. They're basically reverting the changes to block stability and CC. I think this is a buff to medium and light, mostly light and then a little bit of medium. I think heavy is unchanged. I never know how these work. It's not a stat that I really pay attention to. I'm sure Merkro will do, a longish video talking about it, and it'll be very important. But for me, I just play the game and have fun, right? But I think it's a nerf to, well, it's not really a nerf to heavy. It's a buff to light, because you'll now not be CC'd as long. It could mean that we see a lot of assassins back in the meta, so we'll have to wait and see if that's something we want, or if that's something we get. Shuriken Empower's been slightly buffed, I think. I never use it, but fair enough. Couple of issues for Void Gauntlet, nothing amazing, I don't think. Sort of the same for the life staff. First one's about controller. Oh, and then that probably is a big one, actually. It looks like the mana cost and the cooldown was activating, even though the spell was being cancelled. I'm sure the healers will be rejoicing. Everybody else probably didn't even realize it was a thing. This next one's actually pretty big. If you didn't know, with this one, there was a hatchet. I'll call it an exploit, if you want to call it an exploit. What you could basically do with the light attack is you could light attack 3 times and then very quickly right click to do an aimed throw, and then carry on light attacking like you started the animation cycle again. The 4th light attack is supposed to sort of like slow you down, but you could just skip that and just keep attacking. Wasn't like incredibly easy to do, but it wasn't that hard to do either. There's a little bit of a change to Keen Berserk. The perk will now no longer have a low health condition. Instead, the Keen Berserk perk now grants a scaling 5, 13, 20% bonus to crit chance and crit damage while Berserk is active. That'll be very interesting. Little fix to the Fire Staff. I wasn't personally ever affected by that, but sounds like a good fix. And they are going ahead with the Flare passive, which I've got over now. It's a bit of a meme, or it was a bit of a meme. Now it might be sort of useful, maybe, probably not, we'll see, I don't know. Don't think it needs this buff, the Fire Staff. I think it should have probably just been left, but okay. Then we come to the musket. There's a lot of buffs to the musket, to be honest, which, going back to the Fire Staff, I don't think the musket necessarily needed. I thought the musket was in a decent spot, but there's quite a few fixes and, just improvements. You could basically accidentally fire the musket twice. Sometimes it would just make the sound of the shot twice. Sometimes it would actually do the shot twice. Some people knew how to trigger that. I never really bothered with it, but I think they're fixing it. They're also fixing something that prevented the weapon reload. This was happening to me all the time, although I never really fired it from the hip, but sometimes the reload just seems to take longer than normal, and you don't really know why. That could be this, it might not be. Another huge one here is that they've removed the accuracy penalty when rotating the player camera. That should basically mean that the musket is more accurate. Could be a bit of a worry if you're against muskets, but if you were the musket player, that's decent. And the stopping power has been changed from 3 meters to 5 meters. So that's just a little buff. They've changed Deadeye Ultimate as well. Basically, they removed the headshot condition from the Deadeye Ultimate. Instead of granting a bonus if 2 or more targets are hit with a single attack, the headshot is no longer required. I'm not sure how often you hit 2 or more targets, but you know, okay, sounds good. I can't hit headshots anyway, so that's fine for me. Well, that's a little buff, but I don't really understand it because I don't know what the lethal combo is. Can't remember off the top of my head. Fixed something that was sort of causing the entombed ability to be good because it was triggering refreshing frost twice per activation. Obviously that's not intended. Fixed an issue that stopped the characters being unable to move when teleporting during an active ice gauntlet entombed ability state. Literally no idea. The bow is getting some, well, I'd say some big changes, but not really. It's getting a little bit of a nerf, and it's getting a little bit of a nerf because some of the exploiters are no longer going to be able to exploit. You can basically, now I don't really fully understand how you do it. You know how you had the rapid bow? Some people are still being able to attack quicker with cancelling either Rain of Arrows, Penetrating Shot, or Poison Shot ability. I don't really fully understand how you're doing it. You were basically shooting, pressing the ability, but not actually doing the ability and then shooting, and it was increasing the attack rate. Never did it, but I know some people who did. Some people didn't think it was an exploit. This confirms that it wasn't actually intended. I mean, we knew it wasn't intended, but some people were like, you never know. They just didn't want to be called exploiters, right? Which is fine. You know, it is what it is. They finally fixed it. So now you do know. They have reduced the Rain of Arrows Bounded Arrows damage dot tick from 15 to 9%, just a nerf to Rain of Arrows. And they reduced the dot duration on Poison Shot from 10 seconds to 7 seconds. I don't think the bow was like that much strong. I actually think the Fire Staff was stronger than the bow. So to see bow nerfs in comparison to like a Fire Staff buff, to me is a little bit weird. Maybe I'm wrong in that sense, but yeah, for me, I would have picked a Fire Staff over a bow if I was looking for pure strength. But you know, the devs might have some data that I don't have. The blunderbuss is getting some interesting changes. Basically, the time to reload is getting reduced, and then the damage is going to be decreased on top of that to make up for it. So you're gonna be able to shoot quicker, but each shot's gonna do less damage. That basically nerfs its like one-shot capacity, but in theory will keep the same damage output over time. A bit of a nerf. I think it's actually a nerf because it's like priority with the blunderbuss is like burst. And they're also then going to nerf the exhaustive net shot. I don't think it needed this. I mean, the exhausted net shot, sure, it's absolutely like completely oppressive, but the blunderbuss, I just don't think it necessarily needed any changes. Don't think it needed any nerf. It's already been nerfed into the ground. Very quickly, the flail one, they've adjusted the leader of the pack passive by increasing the damage when no allies are nearby from 10 to 15%, and they increased the empower allies receive when they are from 5 to 10%. Just a buff to the flail. Okay, little buff. They've changed the mind with Deadly Flourish. They were basically going to make it so that it was a dot. They've changed the mind, so no change with the rapier. And then probably onto the next two strongest weapons. I actually probably put the spear as the strongest weapon and maybe the sword and shield as the second, which breaks my heart because I play both, but it is what it is. They were overpowered. It is what it is. Cyclone's just having its tooltip updated, but the big one is the evasive maneuvers, which is the one that I think reduces the stamina of your dodges for 2 seconds after you like trigger it. Basically will now only apply to the next dodge within 2 seconds, not all the dodges. Makes sense. People are bunny hopping all over the place and, you know, deserved. And Fortifying Perforate is being nerfed. Now, the spear is sort of going down a little bit in the meta. Don't get me wrong, it's still probably number one. The hatchet was sort of on the rise. I think this is probably a good change. So I think these two changes are probably good changes, probably needed. Not like a sledgehammer to the problem. It's just tweaking it a little bit. Let's see what happens with that. I still think the spear will be strong. Problem is if you take away the spear and you reduce the CCs on light any amount or something like that, you could end up with a situation where light armor people become impossible to kill. There's no like single focus damage and you know you can just kite for days. So we'll see what that does to the meta. Think it should be okay, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to wait and see. They've updated Invigorated Crits passive from a flat stamina gain to an increased stamina regen of 30% for 3 seconds on crit. Yeah, again, this is probably just to reduce the number of dodges that you get because that's the strength of the spear. There are some changes to the sword and shield, but really they're all just like bust to the defender tanking stuff, which I don't think most people in PvP use. There'll be some war players being like, actually, Jay, this is the meta. But typically speaking, when I'm using sword and shield, I'm sort of CCing and stunning and stuff like that and doing damage, you know, with some left clicks. Don't think there's any major change there. Defender's Resolve basically getting buffed. The only one that does actually more damage as far as I can see is the fact that Whirling Blade has been increased from 2 meters to 3 meters. Huge. Nah, nobody was really... Well, some people were using it, but it wasn't really the main damage deal, I don't think. Just some straight up buffs to the Warhammer. Mighty Gavel's going to be doing more damage, and now you'll do more damage if they're less than 50% instead of being less than 30% with the Mighty Gavel. Alright, fair enough. Hammer's in a weird spot, always in a weird spot. It's a great clump weapon, pretty terrible in an individual circumstance most of the time unless you're a trad. The winged leather shoes is getting updated as they said. You will now do 10% extra damage whilst you have haste. The magnetic gauntlets crit damage has been reduced from 30%. No, sorry, it's been reduced from 50% to 30%. So you'll be doing more crit damage if you have them on. Okay, good. Well, I'll say good. It's a boost. It's a boon. And they finally fixed Phoenix. Basically, it was disabled for a long time because you could like do stuff where you became invulnerable. I don't know why I said unvulnerable. Unvulnerable. I am invulnerable. Okay, shut up, Jay. They basically made it so that you will now die, which is intended. So, you know, good. They've changed a couple of things with consumables. One of them, they've made it so that you won't slide if you have a flail and a shield. And the other, they fixed an issue that prevented consumables from cancelling melee basic attacks on startup. I don't know. They fixed an issue that prevented consumables from cancelling melee basic attacks on startup. So was that basically you could take the consumable and still do an attack? What's weird is I don't know what this is. But it feels like when I take a potion, it takes like forever before you can actually do anything now. Don't know if that's intended. This doesn't sound like it fixes that. And they do say using a consumable item can now cancel a block action. Basically, it sounds like they've made consumables even more awkward. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that. Don't like it. It is what it is. Right, you can no longer shoot through fort gates in Outpost Rush. Didn't know you could do that. You can now buy a siege ammo kit a little bit easier because it's cheaper. And sometimes the Winter Rune Forge puzzle wasn't appearing because the game was broke. Little change to mount with like input moving backwards. Don't really understand it. Don't really know what it is. They fixed the tower camp skin so you can't deploy it in a fort, which is what you were able to do before it was disabled. And finally, and I'm surprised they've not made this a much bigger issue, fixed the issue that was stopping the in-game store from opening. Certain people couldn't get in the store, which for them was very annoying and probably for Amazon even more annoying. All in all, the Rabbit's Revenge is fine, interesting, whatever. It's going to last until June 18th, but the big thing is the shards. Like, that's just mind-blowing. Just feels like it came out of left field. But if they've had this prepped, then I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some like big system changes along with console. I still think we might end up with DLSS and DirectX 12 and all this kind of jazz. Maybe they're going to roll them out before console, but this is definitely happening for console, right? You don't do this just for fresh start when you've already had the launch of the game and then fresh. You do this, I think, for console. Windswood, Monarch's Bluff just makes perfect sense. Don't really want it to be everywhere, but I would accept it temporarily being somewhere. So I would absolutely have it if we have a new zone. I think that would make sense. And then for the combat changes, let's hope that makes combat feel a bit smoother, especially the movement. That's going to be very, very important. All the animation blending, hopefully that all works well. And then the big meta changes, if I'm honest, are probably to the musket, the bow. Well, the musket's getting a buff, the bow's getting nerfed a little bit, and the spear's getting nerfed a little bit. The spear I agree with. Musket and the bow, not really bothered either. I don't really think it's that big. Honestly, just huge and surprising. Like, I'm still shocked by it, I think. Shards in New World. I didn't think it was possible. But they do surprise us. And they're going to surprise us on June 7th. June 7th has been confirmed when we get the announcement, by the way, at Summer Game Fest. I'll be streaming it live right over on Twitch. Make sure you come and watch that. It's at 10 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Work it out from there, guys. I'm not your teacher. For now, though, big shout out to my Patreons. I do really appreciate you guys. Have a most beautiful day. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.